when everything started tilting. Okay, I'm posting here because I genuinely don't know anymore if I'm overreacting or if this has been building up for years. I'm 24 now, the older son in a family that used to feel normal enough, at least until my younger sister was born. I'm not blaming her, she was just a kid. But from that moment on, something shifted hard. I went from being their son to being the backup plan, and she became the center of the universe. My parents are complicated. In public, they're charming and warm, but at home they can be sharp, sarcastic, and weirdly manipulative with guilt. One day they'll say they're proud of me. The next day they'll call me selfish because I didn't sacrifice something for family. And they lie. A lot. They'll promise one thing, then later swear it never happened and make me feel like I'm losing my mind for remembering it differently. After my sister arrived, the unfairness didn't explode overnight, it crept in slowly. I was always told, you're older, you have to understand, you have to give in, you have to be the strong one. At first it was small stuff. My things became her things, my plans got cancelled for her activities. Then it got heavier. My achievements were treated like expected obligations, while hers were celebrated like miracles. For a long time I convinced myself this was just how families worked, that I needed to be tougher, quieter, more understanding. But deep down, this weird feeling started growing, like I wasn't really a son anymore, just a resource they could tap whenever they needed something. And honestly, back then I had no idea how chaotic and intense things were about to get next. The first cracks, things started feeling off. Looking back, I can't point to one dramatic moment where everything broke. It was more like tiny cracks that kept spreading until I couldn't ignore them anymore. The biggest change was how my parents' tone toward me shifted. Before, they'd at least pretend to listen. After my sister got older, every conversation with me turned into criticism or a lecture about how I wasn't doing enough for the family. One random example that still sticks with me: I saved up for months to buy my own laptop for school. I was proud. First big thing I got completely on my own. A week later, my mom asked if my sister could borrow it just for homework. I said okay, thinking it would be temporary. That borrowing turned into permanent. When I asked for it back, they said I was selfish because she needs it more. Somehow my effort turned into proof that I was cold and ungrateful. Then came the sudden mood swings. One day they'd be overly nice, cooking my favorite food, asking about my plans, and I'd start thinking maybe things were improving. The next day they'd explode over something small, like me not answering a call instantly, accusing me of abandoning them. It felt like emotional whiplash. I also noticed they started comparing everything. If I got good grades, well, your sister is more creative. If I worked part-time, your sister is more sensitive and needs support. No matter what I did, the finish line kept moving. And every time I tried to talk about it, they'd say I was jealous of a child, which made me feel disgusting for even bringing it up. At that point, I didn't think they didn't love me. I just thought, maybe I was difficult. Maybe I was the problem. And that belief stuck way longer than it should have. The realization started creeping in. The moment I really started questioning everything wasn't some huge family fight. It was a bunch of small, weird discoveries that didn't add up. Like overhearing my parents on the phone with relatives, talking about me like I was this cold, distant kid who never helps, while I was literally working part-time and still doing most of the chores at home. I remember standing in the hallway thinking, wait, are we talking about the same person? Then there were the lies. Not big dramatic lies, just constant little ones that piled up. My dad would promise to help me with something important, then cancel last minute and later claim he never agreed. My mom once told me they couldn't afford to help me pay for a course I needed. A week later they bought my sister a brand new phone because she was stressed. When I brought it up, they said I was remembering wrong. One of the most confusing moments happened by accident. I found a family group chat on an old tablet. Nothing illegal or shocking, just messages where they joked about how he'll manage on his own anyway whenever I needed support. That sentence hit harder than any argument. It wasn't anger. It was the casual way they assumed I didn't need care. At first I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were stressed. Maybe I was too independent. Maybe this was just tough love. But the more I paid attention, the clearer the pattern became. My struggles were minimized, my successes were expected, and my feelings were always turned into proof that I was too sensitive. That's when the thought first crossed my mind, not as a dramatic realization, just a quiet, uncomfortable question. What if they don't actually care about me the same way? Part 4/15. The confrontation that blew everything open. I held everything in for way too long. I kept telling myself I needed better proof, that maybe I was just being dramatic. But one night things exploded out of nowhere. One of those sudden family dinners where everyone pretends things are fine until they aren't. It started small. My mom made a comment about how I never show up for family, even though I had literally just come home from work and still helped cook. I tried to stay calm and said, "That's not fair. I do a lot, you just don't see it." My dad immediately cut in with that sharp tone he uses when he wants to shut conversations down, saying I was being disrespectful and ungrateful. Something in me just snapped. I told them I felt like nothing I did mattered, like they only saw me when they needed something. I mentioned the broken promises, the constant comparisons, the way my achievements were brushed off. My voice was shaking, but I didn't yell. I genuinely wanted them to understand. Their reaction. Classic deflection. My mom started crying and said I was attacking her after everything she sacrificed. My dad accused me of rewriting history and claimed they always treated both of us equally. Then they flipped it. Suddenly, I was the one hurting them. They said I was jealous, selfish, and trying to create drama. The weirdest part was how fast the conversation turned. 1 second I was explaining how I felt. The next they were telling me I was the reason the family was falling apart. I remember sitting there feeling like I walked into a trap I didn't even know existed. That was the first time I left a room and realized, talking honestly to them didn't bring us closer. It just made them double down harder. The emotional fallout, anger, confusion, and that quiet kind of sadness. After that confrontation, something inside me just collapsed. Not in a dramatic way, more like the slow realization that I'd been hoping for a reaction I was never going to get. I went back to my room that night feeling angry at first. Angry that they twisted everything I said. Angry that being honest somehow turned me into the villain. For a few days I walked around with this constant tension in my chest. Every little comment from them felt like a personal attack. If they asked me to do something, I heard it as criticism. If they ignored me, I felt invisible. It was exhausting being stuck between wanting distance and still wanting their approval. Then the anger started fading into something heavier, sadness mixed with self-doubt. I replayed the conversation in my head 100 times, wondering if I had been too harsh, too emotional, too much. I even caught myself almost apologizing for bringing things up, just to restore some fake version of peace at home. And here's the part that messed with me the most. Despite everything, I still crave those small moments of kindness from them. If my mom suddenly asked how my day was in a softer voice, I'd feel hope again. If my dad joked with me for 5 minutes, I'd think maybe things were changing. Then the cycle would reset, criticism, guilt, denial, and I'd feel stupid for believing things could be different. That period taught me how confusing emotional whiplash can be. You start doubting your own memory, your own feelings, your own worth. And even though nothing huge had happened yet, the tension in the house was building fast, like something big was about to drop out of nowhere. When my sister got married at 20, and chaos multiplied overnight. Just when I thought the family dynamics couldn't get more unpredictable, my sister, who had always been treated like she could do no wrong, suddenly announced she was getting married. She was 20. The whole thing moved insanely fast. 1 week she said she met someone serious. A couple of months later there was a wedding being planned like it was the event of the century. Her husband. I'm trying to be fair here, but he didn't have a job. At all. My parents kept insisting he was just between opportunities and that he had big plans, even though no one could actually explain what those plans were. Still, they went all in, emotional speeches, huge expectations, acting like this marriage was the greatest achievement in the family. Then came another sudden turn. Not long after the wedding, they had a baby. Everything escalated overnight. The house felt like it was constantly on edge. New responsibilities, financial stress, arguments whispered behind closed doors. And somehow, even though I was barely involved in their decisions, the pressure started drifting toward me. My parents began dropping comments like, "Family has to stick together now more than ever," or "You're the stable one. You understand responsibility." At first it sounded harmless, almost supportive. But there was this underlying tone that made me uneasy, like they were setting up expectations I hadn't agreed to. Watching everything unfold felt surreal. I was proud of my sister for starting her own life, but at the same time I could feel the familiar pattern forming again. sudden changes, emotional chaos, and me slowly being pulled into problems that weren't mine. And deep down, I had this sinking feeling that the real pressure hadn't even started yet. When their expectations turned into demands. It didn't take long after the baby was born for things to shift from subtle hints to straight-up pressure. At first, my parents framed everything as temporary help. They'd say stuff like, "You're doing well for yourself, you've always been independent," which sounded almost like praise, until the second half of the sentence hit, "So you should support your sister while they get back on their feet." The requests started small and sudden, watching the baby last minute because they had an emergency, lending money that was supposedly just for groceries, giving rides across town because my sister's husband had important things to figure out. Every time I hesitated, the guilt trips came out immediately. My mom would talk about how exhausted she was. My dad would say I was the only reliable one left in the family. Then the lies started creeping in again. They'd tell me my sister's husband was actively looking for work, that interviews were lined up, that things were about to stabilize. Weeks passed. Nothing changed. But whenever I asked questions, they'd say I was being judgmental or unsupportive during a hard time. The most shocking part was how quickly my achievements turned into obligations. Because I had built my life on my own, worked, saved, made careful choices, my parents started acting like that success belonged to the entire family. Suddenly, everything I earned was framed as something I owed back to them and to my sister's new household. I remember one random evening when my dad casually said, "You have more than enough. Your sister needs you more right now." It wasn't even a request. It felt like a rule that had been decided without me. That's when I realized the pressure wasn't temporary. It was growing, and it was about to get way more intense. When family support turned into straight-up entitlement. At some point, the tone changed completely. It wasn't "can you help?" anymore. It was "you owe us." My parents started saying it openly, that everything I'd achieved on my own was somehow built on their sacrifices, and that now it was my responsibility to carry my sister and her husband while they figured things out. The craziest part? They began acting like my sister's husband not working was normal, even noble. They'd make excuses like he was searching for his purpose or not meant for boring jobs. Meanwhile, I was working long hours, paying my own bills, trying to build some stability, and suddenly being treated like a walking safety net. There were constant sudden moments where they'd corner me emotionally. Random late-night calls saying my sister was struggling and needed financial help immediately. Surprise family meetings where they'd present me with plans I'd never agreed to, like helping with rent or covering baby expenses just until things settle. And if I hesitated, they'd switch tactics, crying, accusing me of abandoning the family, reminding me how they raised me better than this. One moment that really stuck with me was when my mom told relatives I had already agreed to help them long-term, before I had even said yes. I found out through a cousin who congratulated me for being so generous. I felt trapped, like decisions about my life were being made behind my back and then presented as obligations. And still, part of me felt guilty for even questioning it, because they kept repeating the same line, "Family takes care of family." The moment I almost gave in. I wish I could say I stood strong from the beginning, but honestly, there was a point where I almost folded completely. The pressure didn't come all at once. It was this constant drip of guilt, late-night calls, and emotional speeches about how I was the only hope keeping the family together. One week was especially chaotic. My sister called crying about bills, my mom kept telling me the baby needed stability, and my dad started sending long messages about responsibility and loyalty. They even framed it like I'd be a bad uncle if I didn't step up more. Hearing that over and over started messing with my head. I began doubting my boundaries, wondering if maybe I was selfish for wanting to keep my own life separate. I actually sat down and started calculating how much I could realistically give up, extra work hours, my savings, even plans I'd been building for years. I remember staring at my bank app thinking, maybe this is just what being a good son looks like. It felt heavy, like I was slowly handing over pieces of my future just to keep everyone calm. Then came another sudden moment that shook me. I overheard my parents talking like my financial help was already guaranteed, joking about how he always caves eventually. That hit me hard. It wasn't gratitude or relief in their voices. It was expectation. That was the first crack in the guilt bubble. I realized I was about to sacrifice everything not because I truly wanted to help, but because I was afraid of being seen as the bad guy. And for the first time, a different thought appeared. Maybe saying no wasn't betrayal. Maybe it was self-respect. But I still hadn't said it out loud yet, and the next conversation changed everything. Drawing the line, I finally stood my ground. It hit me one night, after another guilt-laden lecture from my parents, that enough was enough. My chest was tight, my patience gone. I couldn't keep bending my life around everyone else's mistakes while pretending it was my responsibility to fix them. So I decided, firmly, no hesitation, I was going to say exactly what I felt. I told them straight, I am not responsible for your choices, for my sister's choices, or for her husband. I've built my life on my own, and I will continue to do that. You can't guilt me into being someone I'm not. My voice was shaking at first, but it got steadier with every word. I named every manipulation I'd noticed, the lies, the comparisons, the constant framing of my achievements as obligations, and I refused to soften it. Their reactions were classic meltdown mode. My mom started crying, talking about all she sacrificed, and my dad tried the old, sharp sarcasm, calling me ungrateful and selfish. My sister's husband, who had been silently observing, looked uncomfortable, maybe realizing for the first time how much he had been sheltered by their protection. I didn't back down. I told him bluntly, if you want to rely on someone else's success, go get a job. Stop pretending this is my responsibility. I think that was the first time anyone in that room heard me really say, no excuses, no guilt, no compromise. And the weirdest thing? After the initial chaos, there was a silence. Not the tense kind, but the kind where everyone realized the old pattern wasn't going to work on me anymore. That moment felt like a reset, scary, but also liberating. The fallout and tricky aftermath. After I laid everything out, the house felt different. Not immediately better, but different. My parents were quiet for days, which, honestly, was both terrifying and relieving. I kept expecting them to start up again with guilt trips, but it was like they had to recalibrate, realizing the old manipulation tactics didn't work on me anymore. My sister and her husband were another story. At first, there was tension. They were used to me falling in line, helping with whatever they needed. But after I firmly explained that I was not responsible for their finances or their choices, the dynamic shifted. The husband, especially, couldn't lean on me anymore. He started applying for jobs, finally taking responsibility, and my sister, well, she had to adjust too. It was awkward for everyone, but I could see the change happening. Emotionally, I felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. Standing my ground was empowering, but it also opened old wounds, memories of all the times I was guilt-tripped, ignored, or dismissed. It made me realize how much I had internalized their manipulations over the years, and how easily I almost gave in. I also noticed something subtle but important. I stopped walking on eggshells. If my parents criticized me now, I could respond calmly or ignore it without the crushing self-doubt that used to follow. It was liberating, even if the house was tense at times. This period taught me that boundaries aren't just lines you draw for other people. They're also about saving yourself from emotional exhaustion. And finally, I realized that some family relationships only respect limits when you enforce them consistently. Claiming my space and rebuilding myself. Once the immediate tension settled a bit, I started thinking about my own life more clearly. For years, I'd been living on autopilot, adjusting my plans, my emotions, even my ambitions around my parents' moods and my sister's needs. Now, I finally felt like I could breathe. I set some hard boundaries. No more lending money unless I choose to, no last-minute babysitting unless it fits my schedule, and no emotional guilt trips would manipulate me. Every time my parents or sister tried the old tactics, I calmly reminded them of the rules. It wasn't easy at first. They would pout, nag, or accuse me of being cold, but sticking to it slowly reshaped how they treated me. I also focused on my own achievements without feeling like I had to explain or apologize for them. I saved more, invested in myself, and started planning long-term goals without anyone's interference. It felt weirdly peaceful. Like finally, for the first time in years, my life was mine. The most surprising part? My sister and her husband eventually started handling their own issues instead of depending on me. I didn't do anything dramatic to force it. I just stopped being the safety net. It was almost poetic. By asserting myself, I forced others to grow up too. It was still messy, and some guilt lingered. But each day I kept reminding myself, helping is fine, being manipulated is not. And that little mantra became the backbone of my recovery. Lessons learned about family, respect, and responsibility. Looking back, the whole experience was exhausting, but it taught me a few things I wish I'd known earlier. First, love and obligation are not the same. Just because someone gave birth to you, raised you, or shares your last name doesn't automatically give them the right to control your life. Second, boundaries are non-negotiable. If I hadn't finally drawn a hard line, I would have slowly given away my independence, my savings, and my emotional energy, all under the guise of family duty. The scary part is how easy it is to slip into that trap without realizing it. Third, people rarely change unless they face consequences. My sister's husband only started applying for jobs once it became clear I wasn't going to bail him out. My parents, on the other hand, learned that their guilt trips and manipulations didn't have unlimited power over me. Respect has to be earned, even from family. Finally, I learned that it's okay to love family and keep them at arm's length emotionally. You don't have to sacrifice your mental health for the sake of appearances or out of misplaced guilt. Self-respect isn't selfish, it's survival. Honestly, the whole ordeal still stings sometimes, but I feel stronger for having gone through it. I finally understand what it means to advocate for yourself, even when it feels like the world, or your own family, is against you. How I decided to move forward. After all the tension, the guilt trips, and the emotional chaos, I had to make a real decision about what my relationship with my family would look like from now on. I realized there were only a few options: keep bending until I broke, completely cut them off, or create a boundary-based relationship where respect is mutual. I chose the last one. I wasn't going to ghost my family. I still love them, weirdly, but I made it clear, I'm in charge of my life. If they want my help, it comes on my terms. If they disrespect me, there are consequences, even if that means taking space from them. I also decided to stop carrying my sister and her husband's responsibilities. They needed to figure things out themselves, and I couldn't keep being the family ATM or emotional punching bag. It wasn't easy at first. There were arguments, guilt trips, and even tears, but sticking to my decision gradually reshaped the dynamic. And honestly, it feels like breathing for the first time in years. I'm not walking on eggshells, I'm not apologizing for existing, and I finally get to live my life without constant manipulation hanging over me. This isn't a perfect ending. Family is still complicated, but it's the first time I feel like I'm in control of my own story. The takeaways and advice for anyone in this situation. Looking back on everything, I realize this experience taught me lessons I'll carry forever. First, family love doesn't mean unconditional control. Boundaries are not optional, they're survival. Saying no isn't betrayal, it's self-respect. Second, achievements you earn on your own are yours, not the family's to demand or manipulate. Just because you succeed doesn't mean you owe your parents or siblings your life, money, or happiness. Third, standing up for yourself is scary, but necessary. The first time I firmly said, I am not responsible for your choices, I thought I'd break the house. Instead, it reshaped how people treated me. Respect had to be earned, even in a family. Finally, loving someone doesn't mean letting them hurt you emotionally. You can care about your family and still enforce rules for your own well-being. It's okay to step back, say no, and focus on your life. So, for anyone reading this and feeling trapped under expectations, guilt, or manipulation, it's okay to prioritize yourself. It's okay to draw lines. And it's okay to demand respect, even from the people who raised you. Because at the end of the day, protecting your mental and emotional health isn't selfish. It's survival.